Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mara Walsh and I am your host today. I'm so excited to be back on Zoom to host this virtual tour this week. I've been out and about on real life tours for the past several weeks. 42 of us spent 19 days exploring all that Western Europe has to offer. And then just after a few short days, I took a group of 22 to Alaska, where we enjoyed a land tour and a cruise. It feels great to be out on tour again. But tonight, we're back in our armchairs for a virtual tour experience. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll share a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Mara Walsh. I am in the US and specifically between Philadelphia and New York. This is in the Eastern time zone. I say that because all of our virtual tours are published with an Eastern time zone time frame. So for those of you that are in different parts of the world, you may have to adjust your time a little bit. As you may know by now, when we're not traveling virtually, I host groups on physical tours, as well as help others plan their own family and group vacations. My tours are mainly adult only and open to women and men, and my summer trips are for all ages. If you want to follow our physical tours, please join my Facebook group, which is Girl Travel Tours. You just have to say that you follow my virtual tours when you sign up, and I will know that you've gotten there through this connection. You can also join that group on a mobile device or your computer, but on Facebook. When COVID struck, we were unable to travel physically. I started traveling with my tour guide friends virtually, and thankfully, these virtual tour presentations have helped many tour guides earn some much needed income and have kept the excitement of travel alive for my travel group and many of you. So they have served two purposes quite well. We've done about 80 virtual tours, and the recordings are all available on my website, girltraveltours.com, as well as my Facebook page and my YouTube feed, as well as the website, girltraveltours.com. So you should be able to find any of the recordings of the virtual tours if you want to go back and be reconnected with those regions. We have some more tours planned for this coming year. Right now, I only have one tour that is up for sign up, and that is the Madrid tour, which is scheduled for next week, August 2nd. And I will be traveling throughout the autumn months. So we have a lot of real life tours that are coming up throughout the next few years that you can look into if you're ready to travel physically again. But let's review a few ways you can interact with us today for this virtual tour. And we will feel free to ask questions for the tour guide or for me using the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar. We will address those questions at the end of the session. So please know that we are reading them, and I will respond to anything personally on chat. So if you want to chat something and you're not looking for a live conversation about your question, you can just throw it in the chat and I'll be happy to respond to that during the presentation. And as always, I like to throw up an interactive poll to see what the connection is to the region that we're visiting. And today, since we're going to Old Tokyo, I guess I'm going to ask you, what's your connection to Tokyo? I have been and loved it. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no set plans, but I'm interested in the location, or I am solely here for the virtual experience. I know I have a trip booked. My group has been trying to get to Japan for the last few years, and I know several of my group leader friends have trips that have been backed up as well. So I expect next summer to be very crowded and very busy in Japan, but I hope to be one of those people who are experiencing Japan, and we wait impatiently for it to open back up for tour groups. So let's look at who's answered and what they've said. It looks like most of the people have no set plans, but are interested in the location. It's probably about 40% of us who are saying that. but there's 20% that have been and loved it. And that's a really good percentage, I think, considering how far it is from at least our neck of the woods, which is North America. Only 2% of the people have a trip booked, and I hope they're going with me, and they're here as part of my group. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And if you want it to disappear from your screen, you just have to hit the little X or the little red indicator on the side of the pole so it goes away. Today's tour, as all of our tours, are set for 90 minutes plus the Q&A. So I hope you're ready for the presentation. Again, I take about 5 to 7 minutes in the beginning, then the tour guide comes on for an hour to an hour and 15 minutes or so, and then we have a Q&A, and we do usually let the Q&A run for as long as the questions are here. So sit back and get ready. As you know, a tour would not be complete without a fantastic tour guide. And today we have a treat for you, a first timer with Girl Travel Tours. John McBride is both an educator and a tour guide. And with him, we are going to use a 200-year-old Japanese scroll as our guide to take us through Old Tokyo. I'll share with you via chat and during the Q&A how you can tip the tour director as we go along. And then I, of course, will be sending all those tips to John minus the Zoom operating expenses. So today I want to welcome John McBride to join us. Hello and welcome, John. Feel free to come on and take the controls and share your screen, and we will get ready to go. Are you ready, John?
Yes, thank you, Mara. That's wonderful. There we go, just sharing that. You can see that?
Yes, you are ready to go, John.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really wonderful to be here. I really love what Mara's achieved over the last couple of years with these virtual tours. So I'm very honored to be here. So today I'm going to take you on a journey through the back streets and canals of old Tokyo. And to do that, I'm going to use as our guide a very long painted scroll which depicts the journey to the very fashionable Yoshiwara Courtesan District. Now, the painting, as Mara mentioned, was created over 200 years ago. So it will enable us to stroll the old quarter of Tokyo with an eye to history. Now, today, I'm first going to give you a guidebook that I've written that you can download for free. And then we'll look briefly at the scroll and a little bit of its history. And then I'll provide you with a map of the walk that I've suggested that you undertake. I've designed a day walk, which you might like to do after you've completed Mara's tour of Japan. I know she's got an amazing tour planned for the summer of next year. And perhaps with a little bit of confidence after undertaking that tour, you could complete this day walk as a self-guided walk. And then I think I should talk about the Yoshiwara, what a courtesan district is. And then we'll have some fun. We'll undertake the walk itself, and I'll finish by taking you into an operating tea house. So first, the guidebook. Now, we might put this link in the chat, but you might remember it, bit.ly/Hokusai walk. And I've written up 25 pages for you that you can take with you on the walk, and this will act as your guide, and hopefully you'll remember this talk as well. Now, the scroll. The scroll is titled "The Scenery on Both Banks of the Sumida River," and it was painted by the famous artist Hokusai in 1805. Now, he was 45 years of age when he painted this, so mid-career. But as I said, it's very long or wide and just a foot high. It's 21 feet long. And the top part of the scroll describes a journey on a boat about 2 miles up the Sumida River. And then we get off the boat and the perspective of the painting changes, and we make our way overland about 800 yards half a mile or so, up to the Yoshiwara Courtesan District. And then Hokusai takes us inside a tea house. Now, I'm sure you all know Hokusai, Katsushika Hokusai, and you'll know this famous woodblock print. Now, this is a print, unlike our scroll, which is a one-off painting. Hokusai was 71 when he painted this famous woodblock print, and many of his famous works are from his later years. It's in the series that features Mount Fuji, which you can see in the back there, with these terrifying waves and the fishing boats on the waves. Now, we start at the Yanagibashi Bridge, and at this bridge of an evening, hundreds of pleasure craft would wait to ferry customers up the river to the Yoshiwara. And we see a couple of different types of boats, a covered boat with 4 gentlemen about to board the boat with a geisha accompanying them. She's got a box with some food and perhaps some sake. And then we pass by many famous locations in Tokyo. For example, the Sensoji Temple, the oldest temple in Tokyo, which is a must visit, and we'll visit today. The temple is in the bottom left there, and the famous Azuma Bridge, which we'll visit. And then we get off our ferry at the Imado-bashi Bridge, and we make our way along the Sanya Canal for about half a mile up to the Yoshiwara Courtesan District. Now, the bridge is in the bottom right-hand corner there, and we make our way along the embankment, but this is on foot or in a palanquin, but always accompanied by someone from the arranging tea house, which would book the tea house and the courtesans and the food for you. And they would accompany you with lit lanterns. You can see the beautiful dots of pink there, which are the lanterns. And then we come to the Yoshiwara proper. Now, I think this is a very beautiful depiction of the tea houses of Yoshiwara. Hokusai hints at the stratification in the courtesan district. The main road is called Nakacho, and that's where the first class brothels were located. And the first cross street, Edo-cho, is depicted, and that is where the second class brothels were located. And in the back, he depicts the moat, which kept the girls prisoner within the courtesan district, and the third class brothels overlooked that moat. And then Hokusai takes us inside a tea house. Now, the arranging tea house would prepare a meal, and we see this beautiful sea bream. It's a red fish, which is auspicious, and it's presented to the customers and then taken away and cooked. And then after the meal, you enter the large reception room where entertainment would be provided. And we think that the gentleman in the brown kimono may be a self-portrait of Hokusai. And he's being doted on by geisha. They're pouring him sake, they're dancing, they're singing, playing musical instruments, and great entertainment. And then we move into this intimate space in an antechamber. And we know this is a top class brothel because there are 3 futons, 3 layers of futons. Second class brothels would have 2, and the third class brothels would just have 1 futon. On my tours, customers often ask for an extra futon, and they're always available in the cupboard, and I call them Princess in the Pea, but perhaps we should use 3 futons when we're staying in a Japanese inn. Now, the writing is actually by the person who commissioned the scroll. And let me take you just briefly through this history. It was commissioned by Utei Emba on the left. He's the father of comedy. So that verse is actually comedic. He lists all the place names that we pass by on our journey in a comedic way. When he dies, it's purchased by a very famous collector of Hokusai's work. And then when he dies, it passes to a Japanese art dealer who's working in Paris. And this gentleman was really single-handedly responsible for the Japonism movement in Europe, when Europe fell in love with Japanese art in the 19th century. And then when he became unwell, he left Paris, and in 1903, auctioned his entire collection, and the scroll was sold. And we lost track of the scroll for 100 years, until in 2008, it was offered for auction at Christie's. It was offered for 60,000 US. It sold for 1.1 million US, which was a world record for the artist, for Hokusai, also a world record for a pre-modern Japanese painting. And then 2 years later, it sold to the Sumida Hokusai Museum, which we're going to visit for a handsome profit. And it has become the central work of art for the museum. This is the museum. It sits on the birthplace of Hokusai. It's very contemporary. It was built by the famous architecture firm Sana. In New York, the new Museum of Contemporary Art was designed by Sana. In France, the Louvre Lens Museum, 100 miles north of Paris, was designed by Sana. A wonderful building, very inviting, very easy to enter this museum. And Hokusai lived here most of his 90 years. And this is a wax model, life-size model in the museum of Hokusai in his later years, being assisted by his daughter, Oe. And this is my photo of the scroll at the opening of the museum. And you can see how long it is and how virtually we're taken along in this journey. All right, a map of where we're going. I'm sure you all know the map of Japan. Tokyo sits in the middle of the main island. Until 1868, it was called Edo. And it sits in the middle of the Great Kanto Plain, the population of which is 43 million. The metropolis itself has a population of 14 million. But even when Hokusai was painting in 1805, it was the most populous city in the world. Over 1 million people living in Hokusai's hometown. The center of the city has always been the Edo Castle. And this is today's Imperial Palace, but you're able to visit the Eastern Garden for free. Most of you will arrive at Tokyo Station, which faces out onto the palace. And our scroll takes us up the Sumida River, past all of these locations, and then overland to the Yoshiwara Courtesan District. But what we'll be doing is a 3.5-mile walk. I hope that sounds attractive. We'll start at Asakusa Station, very easy to reach from anywhere in Tokyo. And we'll visit first the Sensoji Temple. I love to visit this temple at 6:30 in the morning. You might be jet lagged, so that might not sound so bad. It's when the priests first open the doors of the temple, and you can be first into these amazing spaces. We then make our way up and cross the Sanya Canal, which is a beautiful strolling path. And then we cross over the river, and we use the cherry blossom bridge, the Sakurabashi bridge, for obvious reasons. But even when Hokusai was painting, this area was famous for cherry blossoms. And then down the other side of the river, past a couple of shrines and gardens that we'll visit on our detailed walk. And we finish at the Sumida Hokusai Museum. All right, so we do need to spend a few minutes considering what the Yoshiwara Courtesan District was all about. Now, in your handout, I have translated for you the main study on the Yoshiwara by a wonderful professor, Tanaka. She is a fabulous person. She's very critical of the Yoshiwara district for its human rights abuses. These tea houses were all powerful. Prostitution was outlawed in Japan in 1952. It is still illegal. But until then, young girls would be loaned to these tea houses. Their parents would be paid a loan. The girls would be between 3 and 7 years of age, and they would start their training to be geisha. They would never pay off this loan. So in fact, they were slaves to these tea houses, and they had very short lives. Average age was 23 from malnutrition and venereal disease. They were serving the best cuisine in the city, but they weren't allowed to eat it. And of course, venereal disease. So it was a very unhappy place for these courtesans of this floating world. But what Tanaka does point out is the vast sums of money that passed to the tea houses. And I've calculated that about 800 million US dollars a year was spent in the Yoshiwara. This money was spent on protecting what we know as Japanese traditional culture today. It supported an entire art industry. Hiroshige depicts the beautiful courtesan district and the courtesans of the Yoshiwara. We all love Japanese cuisine. For 300 years, what we know as Japanese cuisine today was incubated at the Yoshiwara. Japanese textiles that we love were protected in this environment, as were musical instruments and Japanese poetry. So this masterpiece was painted 50 years before Hokusai by Utamaro. This is the golden era of woodblock printing, but it also focuses on courtesans from the district. So Tanaka points out this discrepancy. The very top class oiran, they were called oiran, may have been able to pay back their parents' loans, but there were very few of them. And they were always supported by 4 geisha in training, and they also had their the small children as well, acting as their servants. Now, there were 4 festivals in the Yoshiwara, and one of those was the parade of the oiran. And this parade still occurs near the Yoshiwara in April. All right. So with all of that knowledge to hand, let's have some fun. Let's go on our walk together. I'd love to be with you on this walk, but you'll have all the resources to undertake this as a self-guided walk. Now, we start at the Great Ryogoku Bridge, which spans the Sumida River. It's bustling, and we see these lances on the bridge, which means that feudal lords or governors of states of Japan are crossing the bridge. These lances are made from bear fur, and each had a different shape, so you could tell who the feudal lord was. Hiroshige also depicts the bridge 50 years later, and he writes that the Ryogoku Bridge area was the liveliest place in the eastern capital. There were tea houses and sideshows, theaters, storytellers, which were those comedic storytellers that were started by Utemba, and summer fireworks, which we still have in July along the Sumida River. Day and night, Hiroshige writes, the amusements never ceased. And he depicts the types of watercraft on the Sumida River, which we'll get to know very well in a moment. Now the river, that's the bridge today. And this is the river, the section of the river that we're going to walk. And in the far distance is the Ryogoku Bridge, right next to the sumo wrestling stadium, which we're also going to visit. Across the Ryogoku Bridge was the Ekoin Temple. Now, this is a very important temple to Tokyo. I'm going to mention 3 occasions when the city was obliterated and over 100,000 souls were lost. And this is the first occasion. In 1657, the city was destroyed. And the current street layout of Tokyo was established after this fire. But what the temple was also famous for was sumo wrestling. And I have to admit, I'm a big fan. And Hiroshige wonderfully depicts the main ring with this incredible stadium. And this sat in the garden of the temple. So on the bottom right there, we've got the gate that I just showed you that we enter and we walk through the gardens to the temple. But the main stadium for sumo wrestling for over 100 years was in this temple. And is why just next door today, we have the Sumo Center. And if you happen to be in Tokyo, the bouts are just 2 weeks in January, May, and September. If you happen to be in town, please go and enjoy the wrestling. Now, the seats most of the seats are very expensive and they're torture because you have to sit on your knees. But for $25 in the morning, you can buy a seat in the top rows there, and they're much more comfortable and very reasonable. And I'll see you there. The little bridge is called Yanagibashi Bridge, and it crosses the Kanda River, the source of fresh water in the old city of Tokyo, and a very important tributary to the Sumida. And this is where all of the hundreds of water taxis would wait for customers heading for the Yoshiwara. Now, I'm going to mention the second occasion when the city was destroyed. Look at the date, 1923. This is when the city was destroyed by a great earthquake and all the bridges of the city was destroyed. And a budget was set aside to rebuild the bridges. And so they called them recovery bridges. And they went to Germany and studied the Rhine River bridges. So you might see that Rhine influence in this bridge. This is our last remaining recovery bridge. And right next to it were all of the boats that waited for us to enjoy the river. There are 2 types of boats here, a covered boat, and 4 gentlemen are just about to get on the boat with a geisha, and the chokibune, which is the high-speed hand-rowed gondola. Now, the covered boats are still available at Yanagibashi. This is at the bridge I just showed you. And it really is a wonderful experience in the tradition of our scroll to go out on the Sumida River of an evening or for lunch. It's not too expensive. It's about $100 for a very fine meal and about 3 hours out cruising in the tradition of our scroll. And amitatsu.jp is the company that provides this cruise. This is our little high-speed taxi called a chokibune, which means boar tusk boat. And I hope you understand why the sharp tapered bow. And this lovely group of preservation enthusiasts will take you out every Wednesday. They take these boats out. There's also a famous song dealing with the chokibune, and the song goes that you would catch these boats across to Fukagawa, which is the unlicensed courtesan district, because it was out of the city limits. We didn't know about that, or up to the Yoshiwara, which is the licensed courtesan district.
Oh. 注意の。 저기 서서히 예쁘게 놓아
Okay. Perhaps you have had a couple of cups of sake to enjoy that song. All right, moving upriver, we come to two bridges. Now these very beautiful bridges, they cross over canals that access this big open space called Otakegura, which literally means the honorable bamboo store. And this is where the government stored its building materials, bamboo, timber, and stone. And the Okura Bashi literally means the honorable warehouses. Now today, the old map of Tokyo, when Hokusai painted his scroll, is on the left with the canal, and today that's disappeared, but the open space was still available to the city, and is why we have our sumo wrestling stadium located here and the city's major museum, which is a wonderful visit. I'll take you back. Sorry, I forgot to mention, just behind the museum is our Sumida Hokusai Museum. Now, this is really a wonderful visit. Unfortunately, the museum is closed for refurbishment. They decided through COVID to refurbish, and it's going to take a little while till 2026. But in Fukagawa nearby, which is where the unlicensed courtesan district is, there is a wonderful Edo museum, smaller scale, but a similar experience of visiting the Edo of 200 years ago, Tokyo of 200 years ago. The Matsudaira estate on the edge of the bridge still exists today. Now, all of the estates along the Sumida River had tidal ponds that were the center of the strolling gardens of the feudal lords. Now, none of these ponds are tidal today, but just at this estate, they use a pump to mimic the tide every day. So once a day, these stepping stones are revealed. I took this photo in May with the beautiful azaleas. And then if you stay long enough, the tide comes in artificially and covers up the stones. Now, next we come along to an important waypoint on the journey, the pine tree of success. Now, the pine tree beautifully, the branches bent down and almost touched the waves on the Sumida River. And again, we see the two types of boats, the covered boat with the blinds up, and our high-speed taxi with two people in the taxi. The pine survives today in its original location and is beautifully depicted in this painting 50 years before Hokusai's painting. This is Kano Kyue, but you see how the branches bow down. And so pine of success. So when you're heading up the river, you're hoping for a successful night and that your favorite courtesan will be available. And when you're heading home, you look back fondly with memories of the successful evening. Hiroshige depicts in his famous series, 100 Views of Edo, a covered boat, but note the blind is down. And we know from the two pairs of shoes outside the covered area that a tryst is happening. And if you look very carefully at the blind, you can see the shape of a woman's head, disguised very cleverly by Hiroshige. All right, next we come along to this red flag, which is advertising for a famous cosmetics store, the Komagata-do temple. But do you notice above the temple a little cuckoo? In Japanese, it's called hototogisu. Now, this is a very famous device used in Japanese art, but I think this is the first time it's used. And so we have Hokusai to thank for this little bird. Now I'm going to play, you'll hear his call in the background. It's, it's a very forlorn call. And in Japanese poetry is a metaphor for transience or elusiveness. In literature and myth, it's associated with the longing of the spirits of the dead. So here, I think it could be used to suggest the longing of a male lover after a nocturnal tryst. We hear the call. Now, after Hokusai, the little bird is always depicted diving downwards, suggesting mourning or longing and melancholy. And Hiroshige's work is on the right there. Okay. And 50 years later, Hiroshige copies Hokusai directly with the red flag and the cuckoo and the white walls of the Komagata-do hall. Now that, so the temple is the Komagata-do hall, and diagonally across the street was the cosmetics store. It was called Hyakusuke. And the red flag was always flying. You can see the white walls of Komagata-do, and right across the street was the cosmetic store. And boats would always dock here, and the customers would pop out and buy some beautiful white or red makeup as a gift for their favorite courtesan. And that's a colorized version of that old woodblock print. Now that's what the store looked like. So you'd sit on the veranda and pay your copper coins for very expensive makeup. And this is the beautiful advertising material. It's a flyer for the cosmetic store, for Hyakusuke. And they use Hokusai's little cuckoo. So I like to think that perhaps they were at a salon gathering where this scroll was presented. And the script says Oshiro, which means honorable white makeup. Now, this is the hall today. It's a disaster. It's painted red. It shouldn't be red. It should be white. I've complained to the Sumida ward office. It's very important to the foundation myth of Sensoji Temple. So the myth goes that in 628, remember this is Tokyo's oldest temple, two fisher boys were fishing in the Sumida River, and they caught in their net a 2-inch high gold statue of the Kannon, goddess of mercy. And they took it to their boss, a very wealthy landowner in the area, and he gave them a sermon about Buddhism, and he built a thatched roofed hut here, and the two boys worshipped Kannon for the rest of their lives. And this is the deity that is contained in Sensoji Temple, which we're going to visit in a moment. And I've taken this photo from where the cosmetic shop was located, and you look diagonally across the road to Little Hall and Sky Tree in the background. Kano depicts this scene beautifully again. There's the little white Komagata-do, the main gate to Sensoji Temple, and the temple itself. All right, next we come to the second major bridge that crossed the Sumida, the Azuma Bridge. And this bridge looks like this today, and it leads across to the famous Asahi Beer headquarters and to Skytree, the highest communications tower in Tokyo. This is the Asahi Beer headquarters. It was designed by Philip Stark. It's meant to look like a beer jug with the froth of the beer on the top. And it's anyone's guess what he was thinking with the sort of the flame-like building on the right. The important thing to know is if you like beer and it's a warm day, there are two excellent beer halls on the top floors of both of those buildings, and they ensure that it's their most delicious beer, very fresh draft beer. And then just where those buildings are located, we come to the Kitajiken River, which the Sky Tree is built on, and two delightful little bridges. The little bridge was within the Mito estate, and this survives today and is a park we'll visit. And the locals called them the pillow bridges because they looked like the pillows of an old husband and wife, and they were called Shin-san and Gen-san after their proper names. Now, this river has been improved dramatically as a condition of building the Sky Tree. So the canals are really clean now, and you can undertake really interesting tours on cruises of the old canal systems, and galleon.jp is the company that provides these tours. Again, very reasonable. For about $30, you can take a 2-hour cruise. And this very long cruise starts at Sky Tree and takes you through the back canals. They stop at a coffee shop these days. But for me, importantly, up at 15 Ryogoku Bridge, they take you up our journey as far as the Sanya Canal and then back. So you can actually take a cruise that approximates the journey of our scroll. Now, at the Pillow Bridge, there was a famous restaurant, and it was called Yaomatsu. And there's a famous statement about Yaomatsu. It goes, in those days, Yaomatsu was a 2-storied, stylish restaurant. The Makura Bridge added elegance to the scene. From the top floor of the restaurant, customers could enjoy views of the tall pagoda of Sensoji Temple to the left, and the forest of Matsuchiyama Shoden, which we'll visit in a moment. Also in those days of clear skies and views, Mount Tsukuba could be seen from the rear of the building in the far distance. It was indeed a magnificent setting. So it was on the corner of the Mito Tokugawa Lower residence, and today that is the Sumida Park, and it's a wonderful strolling garden. This pond is not tidal. They don't have a pump for this pond. Now, next we come back across the river to our most important temple in the city, the Sensoji Temple, and its famous 5-story pagoda. Now, this pagoda was built in 1640, and unfortunately, it burnt down in the 3rd occasion when the city was destroyed. And this was the 10th of February, 1945, when the city was incendiary bombed and completely obliterated. 100,000 souls were lost again. This building was lost as well. It dates to 1953, the new building, but this is the structure within which the 2-story, 2-inch high golden statue of the Kannon is deified. So we've got our pagoda that's been rebuilt. We've got the priest's residence, which we're going to visit, and the Sumida River is off to the right. But note that in the grounds of the temple, which I haven't spelt correctly, is a shrine, a Shinto shrine. And this, to me, is the more important building to visit, because miraculously, this building survived the bombing and dates to 1640. And it is dedicated to those 3 gentlemen, the 2 fisher boys and the wealthy landowner who built the first temple. And it's in Gongen style architecture, which is only used when a human is deified as a Shinto god. So this is actually the really interesting, very important structure in the city of Tokyo. The little Kaminarimon gate we visit, fabulous structure to walk under. And then we have the shopping street, which dates to the 18th century. There are still 89 shops, which is the original number, and they all have interesting histories. For example, one of them is responsible for the little beckoning, waving lucky cats. You might have seen them in Japanese restaurants beckoning in customers. This is the maneki neko. And so it all started here in this shopping precinct. Now, no one ever visits the Demboing Gardens. It's the private garden of the head priest, but they do open them in the spring. So please don't miss it, and you'll be on your own. There won't be many people there. All right, now we come up to the Matsuchiyama Shoden Temple, right at the back of Sensoji. And this is a favorite of mine. It's right at the bridge where we would get off our ferry and start walking up to the Yoshiwara. Now, the creation myth goes back to the reign of Empress Suiko. And this is when miraculously, the story goes, this hill appeared. So I think there was probably some seismic movements and this hill appeared. And then 6 years later, there was a drought in the area, and Kannon, our goddess of mercy, descended to the top of this hill, but, which I find incredible, she took on the form of Ganesha, which is a Hindu god. And I'm sure some of you might have Ganesha. I love Ganesha as a stone statue in your gardens, male torso with an elephant head. Unlike in Hinduism, Ganesha in Japan is never visible. And Ganesha in Japan is always depicted as a male-female coupling. And so this is the image of the deified statue in the temple we'll visit that you can buy as a little wood block print. This is the old bridge, and behind it you see the hill and the temple on top. And that's exactly the hill that we'll climb today and pay our respects, very unusually, to Ganesha. And in Japan, Ganesha loves daikon radish, turnips, not turnips, they're radish. And so the offering, instead of offering money, you pay 250 yen, about $2. You buy a beautiful white radish and you present it to Ganesha. But nothing's ever wasted. So on your way home, you can pick up a bag with a blessed radish in it, and you can cook that in soup for the evening. Across the river is the little Sui Jinja shrine. It still stands today and is very important in the history of the river. Hiroshige on the left there depicts it in its wood. He calls it the wood of the water god. And it looks like a very calm place to visit. It's actually on a little rise, so it never flooded. And so the fishermen and boat handlers along the Sumida River prayed to this deity for safety on the river. But what it's truly famous for is the Sumida River fireworks. And the first time this occurred was in 1773. So Hokusai would have attended these fireworks displays. Hiroshige wrote about the fireworks displays. And people ask why the fireworks go off upriver. And it's because they're being let off from near the Sui Jinja shrine. So now you know. This is in July and is truly an amazing display. Right next door is a very sad little temple, but if you're into theatre, you might be interested in this creation story. And it goes back to a terrible story of trafficking of a young aristocratic child from Kyoto. He was stolen from his mother and dragged all over Japan, and he finally expires on the banks of the Sumida River. And a priest built a mound here to commemorate the young child. Now, this story is portrayed in art, but also importantly in Noh theatre. The crazed Noh theatre is often about crazed women or scorned women. And so, of course, this mother is crazed with anguish. And here she is crossing the Sumida River in a chokibune, and she discovers the location of the mound dedicated to her child. And she begins to pray, saying, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, praise Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light. And when she does that, the spirit of her child appears from behind the mound. Now, the mound still stands and is the reason for the existence of the temple, but there are these wonderful Noh plays that depict this story, and the play is called Sumida River. Now, this is just, I'll play you a tiny bit of the advertising material from the wonderful Kita Noh Theatre. So this is a bit of a plug for this amazing Noh Theatre. Now, this is the moment that the mother starts to pray for her child. Look at this anguish in that tiny movement. This is the mound that she'll collapse onto. This is a bit stylized, sorry. The anguish. Now, remember, this is being played, the anguish of this mother, entirely believable, is being played by a man. Women do play roles in Noh theatre, in contemporary Noh theatre. Traditionally, it was just men, and this was a male actor. But one more plug, Kita, K-I-T-A, Noh theatre. I love going there. All right. Now, when we visited our famous restaurant at Pillow Bridge, at the back of the restaurant, we could see Mount Tsukuba in the clear skies of the Edo period. And this is the mountain today. It's very important in the feng shui of Tokyo. The streets off the Ginza, the famous shopping street, are all aligned with this mountain. And there is another important mountain. And on occasion, on a clear day, usually in winter, you can still see Mount Tsukuba from the city. Of course, the other mountain is Mount Fuji, and all of the main streets of old Edo, Tokyo, are aligned with Mount Fuji. And you can see this in this famous Hiroshige print. This is Suragacho, which is where the Mitsukoshi department store is located today, and this street is perfectly aligned with Mount Fuji. Fuji's spectacular, also usually in the winter when the sky is very clear. There's nowhere at street level in Tokyo today that you can see Mount Fuji. You have to get up high. All right, so now we'll get off our ferry at the Imadobashi Bridge down on the bottom right there. We've seen this old photo. The canal has since been filled in, finally filled in 1975. Now, not all people who got off the ferries here were headed for the Yoshiwara, because the theatre district was located just at the back of our Ganesha temple. So many people were actually headed for the theatre district. And Hiroshige beautifully depicts this theatre district. He takes Edo by storm with the use of his shadow. And it creates this sort of mystical environment. But you now know, as art historians, that Hokusai was using shadow 50 years before this in our scroll. Also note the strange scaffolding on top of the buildings. This meant that the theatre was licensed, and there would be drums beaten in those scaffolds that would invite customers. And our geisha in the Yoshiwara district were called Yagura geisha, not after the fire tower at the Yoshiwara, but after this scaffolding. Now these theatres, oh, so I've had a bit of fun here. This is now a shopping street, and I've sort of recreated Hiroshige's print in the streetscape of today's Saruwakacho. Now, the theatres have now moved down to the Ginza. This is the main Kabuki theatre. But in the middle there, that purple scaffolding, you now know is the drum scaffolding, the Yagura. In November, just in November now, they beat the drum, which is really lovely to listen to. And it means that we're a licensed Kabuki theatre. And this is the other form of Japanese theatre, which is a must visit. Again, there are some very expensive seats, but they have a wonderful system for international visitors. They have $25 seats, and you can go up to the very top and just watch for an hour or two for as long as you want. All right. So now we're going to travel up the Sanyabori Canal, and there were 9 bridges that crossed the canal. The canal has been covered over, but all of those bridges are commemorated along this walk. And we are traveling along what was known as the Nihonzutsumi, or the embankment of Japan. And along this embankment were hundreds of tea houses. And these were the tea houses that arranged everything for the evening in the Yoshiwara. And they were called amigasa tea houses because they lent these disguises for people to wear as they entered the Yoshiwara. Hiroshige depicts the tea houses with people in palanquins or walking. The samurai also had to leave their swords here. No one could take swords into the Yoshiwara. And at the Mikaeri willow, we would turn left down off the embankment. And this literally means the looking back willow tree. So again, in the morning, still the willow tree still stands. In the morning, we would look back with fond memories at this willow tree. Now, along the top where the willow tree is located, there were 10 restaurants in the Edo period serving horse meat. It was called cherry blossom meat, which was a disguise. Also, I've circled the willow tree and the remains of the Yoshiwara Omon, which is the main gate. And the guardhouse, which was at the gate, has now become the local police box. And this is one reason given for the safety of Tokyo. I wouldn't suggest you go into this area. It's actually not a very safe area. Tokyo is very safe. This is the least safe area. I wouldn't go there on my own. But if you're up for a horse meat meal, Mr. Nakae is the famous restaurant. He's been serving horse meat for since the Edo period. All of this meat now is grown in France, is imported from France. But the meal would be eaten in the morning after leaving the Yoshiwara, and it was called ketobashi, which means kick away, because horses are good at kicking. And the thought was that this would kick away venereal disease. Good luck. We pass under the Yoshiwara Omon, the main gate, and Hiroshige depicts the gate beautifully. And in the corner there, we have an oiran. And you know that word now, the most senior geisha. Now I've calculated that in today's money, the cost of purchasing this level of prostitute for the evening would be about $1,500 US dollars. And with the meal and entertainment, that would cost another $1,500. So all up, it would be about $3,000 that it would cost you to be entertained by an oiran. Today, there's not much left of the Yoshiwara. It is not a very pleasant area because of this history of being a courtesan district that has continued into this rather unpleasant sort of nature of what the district is like today. There are a few vestiges left. The area was surrounded by 4 shrines. One of those survives. And the ditch walls, which kept the girls prisoner, I can find walking around the district. All right, now this is the roof line of the Yoshiwara. I think it's very beautiful depiction of these tea houses. And then we enter the tea house proper. As I mentioned, we think that this is probably Hokusai, the only self-portrait that we have of Hokusai. And the intimate space with the futons. Now, let me finish with a visit to a tea house. Now, the tea house, and these details are in your handout, is called Hamadaya. And it was a tea house operating in the original Yoshiwara district for hundreds of years until 1912, when it closed as a tea house. And can I be straightforward and say its days as a brothel finished in 1912. And it then became just a restaurant. And it is a very fine restaurant, which continues the traditions of serving those very beautiful meals that the courtesans served in the Yoshiwara. Now, it's located in a very interesting area, but it's about half an hour walk from the end of our walk at the Sumida Hokusai Museum, back past Ekoin Temple, where the sumo wrestling was, over our Ryogoku Bridge. You'll see the Yanagibashi Bridge off to the right, and then down to Genyadana Hamadaya. And it's in an area called Ningyocho. This was the original Yoshiwara before it burnt down and was moved to the Yoshiwara that we have just visited. But it really is the last remaining restaurant with this tea house history. The owner is an absolute delight. And unfortunately, the meals are very expensive. But what you'll find, but for the quality of the cuisine and the experience, about $200 for lunch. Now you'll find all these fine restaurants have amazing deals for lunch. So have fine cuisine for lunch and have something cheap for dinner. So, you know, the price for dinner is about twice the amount. But these are the meals, the rare cuisines that were served by the courtesans. Now, if you want to spend a lot more, the tea house will still arrange for courtesans to visit, and of course it's just entertainment these days. The older courtesans are usually responsible for the music. There are about 157 courtesans, geisha, working in Tokyo today, a few more in Kyoto. In their training, they must complete their education up to year 10, and then they can start their training to be a geisha. They must do 3 skills, a musical instrument, dance, and song. And but their great skill is conversation. They have to brighten a room. They are booked on a 2-hour basis. They'll arrive, everyone's in a grumpy mood. 2 hours later when they leave, everyone will have laughed and had a great time and be not so sad that they've cost so much. So this is about $2,000 per geisha for 2 hours. So we're seeing $8,000 worth of entertainment there. And the customers there are playing this silly game of rock, paper, scissors, which as you get drunker and drunker becomes more interesting. All right, Mara, I think I've done exactly 1 hour. My clock has just ticked through 60 minutes.
Wow,
so,
that's pretty good,
thank
John.
you. Thank you. I'll stop sharing, and shall we?
Oh no,
have a
I'll
chat?
actually pick it up from here if you don't mind.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was wonderful. Thank you. I think, you know, not only was the content amazing, but I love the juxtaposition of the now and the then, and really knowing how it translates into modern day, which was really great. And because I'm going, you know, I am certainly not a Japanese connoisseur, nor do I know very much at all about Japan. So it gave me a nice background on the history, which now I have to go look up a few things to expand that knowledge. I'm very interested to know about the disappearance of the scroll and how the scroll came about again. So we could talk offline about that, but that is a really interesting part of it to me as well, just from an art history perspective. So what we normally do at this point, John, is we go to the Q&A. And if you're willing, take a drink and, you know, catch your breath for a minute, and then we'll pop up the Q&A, and then we'll go to the top of it, and you can either read them off and answer it, or I can read them to you, whatever you're comfortable with. But I think if you want to go to the top and start reading them, we can go from there.
Okay.
Just be mindful of reading the question aloud so the audience knows what you're responding to.
Oh, well, thanks, Mara, and thank you all for the great questions. So I think Mary is the first question. How tall are those platform zordis the lady in the parade is wearing? So I would call them, I think that's the first one, isn't it, Mara?
Yes,
I
you're
would
correct.
call them, yeah, the zordis are the sandals, the flat sandals. I would call these wooden geta. And indeed, geta are used when it's raining because the geisha have exquisite kimono, and because they're pure silk, the disaster is if they get them wet. So the geta were designed to raise them above the wet ground. But because the oiran is so is in the clouds, you know, in this pink haze of cloud, she is raised even higher above the ground. And to be honest, Mary, I don't know the exact dimensions, but it's about 3 times the height of a normal wooden geta clog, and is terrifying. So it's about a foot high, and you could see how she had to hold on to her manservant And the whole idea is that she's this precious object that is above everyone, and that, you know, if she's not assisted, she'll fall back to earth. So great question. And the next one is from Debbie. Oh, thanks, Debbie. Does John live in Tokyo? I actually live in Sydney. So it's a beautiful sunny winter's morning in Sydney, but I did go to the consulate yesterday and picked up my business visa. I'm off next Tuesday to Japan, my first trip back in 2 years. It's been awful. And at the moment, you can only go on a business visa or a guided tour. They'll open up soon enough, but I'm going for 4 months, so I'll be in Tokyo for the next 4 months.
That's great.
Yeah, finally. Lucia, in one of the painted images, there were twin plumes of smoke coming up from an area. What was the source or reason for it? So Edo was a very wealthy city, and everyone cooked one meal a day, and then you would have cold rice for the other 2 meals. And so it was famous for its little plumes of smoke, and this is coming from the kitchens of the residents of Tokyo. And this was the cause of many fires in the city. Of course, the Meideki fire destroyed the entire city. But good find, well done. I've got in the handout, I've got an image of the full scroll for you as well. Jill, John, is the temple still the actual original building, or has it been rebuilt as many others have been? Great question, Jill. So unfortunately, the 3rd time the city was destroyed was that fire bombing, the incendiary bombing of Tokyo, 10th of February, and the whole precinct was burnt to the ground. And so, yes, they are new modern buildings, they're concrete buildings, but great to visit. But no one ever goes to my shrine just off to the side, which is the original building from 1640. So don't forget to do that. Alex, Connecticut. Will we ever get an exhibition here in Connecticut of Hokusai's work? I hope so. I'm really not sure, Alex. You know, the Sumida Hokusai Museum loves to hear from people. They love that I'm doing this talk for you. You can always email them and ask. They'll be aware of what's touring around the world. The last great exhibition that was on was at the British Museum. That was an amazing exhibition last year. I could only get the catalogue. So from another anonymous attendee, sorry. I live in this area, so it is exciting to follow the guide in English. I've been wondering if there is some tour in English available for people who speak in Japanese. Oh, great, because comparing the views from an international or foreign perspective to the Japanese perspective is so interesting. Oh, thank you. Lovely to have I guess a Japanese participant in today's talk, and thanks for the kind words. Look, all I can suggest is you print out my guide, and perhaps as you're walking around, read out the guide. Perhaps take an international friend with you and discuss what you're seeing. Now, Mr. Nakae actually does, the horse meat restaurant owner, he actually does tours of the Yoshiwara. I've only gone into that district when I've been with him. I would not go in there on my own. But of course, his tours are in Japanese, and I took some guests and interpreted for them. But anyway, I hope you enjoy my guide, which is in English. I see you maybe from New Zealand or Australia. How did you become a guide in the history of Edo? Thanks, Sarah, or Sarah. Yes, you got the accent right. I'm from Australia. Um, um, it just happened that I lived in Japan for a year when I was very young, 11, such an impressionable age. All my nieces and nephews and godchildren have all been dragged up to Japan when they all turned 11. I think it's a wonderful age to introduce kids to Japan, although Mara, I know you don't take kids along, which is very wise.
I think teenagers, actually 12 years and older, so.
Good. 12's a great. After that, they want a bit of independence, maybe. 11's a great age. They do what you're told. They're told. And then I went back and did my undergraduate degree in Japan, and I majored in Japanese classical literature. So I read all of this pre-modern script, and I've lived half my life in Japan. Kathy says all those little girls were trafficked until they died. One boy was trafficked to his death and shrines were built for him. Is anything being done to make up for their history of abusing little girls? What a wonderful thought, Kathy. You know, I didn't put it in the talk, but there is a shrine and temple dedicated to the souls of the 30,000 girls who perished in the Yoshiwara and remembered at this temple. It's actually just behind the horse meat restaurants. And Nakae-san, on his tours, he always takes us all back to that temple and we pray for the repose of those children. Professor Tanaka's strongest point is this is never allowed to happen again from a human rights abuse perspective. So it's a very sad history, but you know, this is the history that we're celebrating through all of this very famous art. So the art is incredibly beautiful, but I think with this eye to history, we also need to remember what is behind the beauty of this art. I mean, we look at Degas and you know his miraculous paintings of young girls, ballerina dancers in Paris, and you know there are similar stories behind this miraculous art that we flock to see in the great museums of Europe. So similar things going on in Japan. Now, next question is, how can we get a physical walking tour in Tokyo, but accessible? Without stairs. Very good question. Now, Tokyo is very flat, so it's not as bad as you might think. And the strolling path along the Sumida River is very flat. And I do see people in wheelchairs on that. There are some accessible points from the Asakusa area. So Japan is getting better for accessibility, and it could be better though. And Lucia says, thank you. What are the paintings behind you? Oh, thank you. It's indigenous art. I have a large collection of art myself, and about a third of it is Australian indigenous art. And my collection is only paintings by women, the senior women of all of the indigenous communities of Australia. I just got on better. I would never buy a painting without knowing the artist, and I went into the communities, and I always just had a rapport with the senior female artists who were always working so hard to protect their communities, keep alcohol out, keep their young kids on the straight and narrow. They work so hard, and it's very difficult because of different abuses that we've perpetrated against Indigenous communities in Australia. So it's my my dedication, and I should mention that I am on Australian Aboriginal land, and it's never been ceded, and it has always been and always will be Aboriginal land. And Marie, would you say that the novel Memoirs of a Geisha is accurate? does it depict this area? Merci, lovely, interesting talk. Thank you, Marie. I loved the book, even though it was written by a non-Japanese person. It was fantastic, and I loved the film, even though there were not many Japanese actresses in the film. That courtesan district was set in Kyoto, and there are 4 major courtesan districts in Kyoto. Now, Kyoto is much more open. Shimabara was the original courtesan district in Kyoto. You can still visit it, but you can also go to Gion, which is amazing, Pontocho, and my favorite district, which is a bit difficult to remember, Kamishichiken. And men and women were welcome to all of those districts all through this Edo period. In Edo, in Tokyo, it was only men. The girls were prisoners. In Kyoto, the geisha could always come and go. And there's about 300 geisha still working in Kyoto. And very often of an evening, you'll see them beautifully made up, hurrying to their next appointment. And so the book was set in Kyoto. I think, you know, it portrayed the stratification of the geisha world very well. The 3 ranks: the oiran, her male and female servants, and the young girls who were in training, and the difficult relationship with her customers. Yeah, so, but yeah, no, I loved the film.
That's
Thanks.
That's a nice modern day connection, but it is, I have to say for myself, and I'm sure for many people, it is such an upsetting part of the history, but important to remember, because as you said, you know, you have to remember so that you don't repeat, right?
Yes.
So I guess I'll transition this over to you, John, and what your passion for Japan is, and what takes you back to Japan so frequently and for half your life. And if you want to wrap that up just with what drives you back to Japan all the time, we can say goodbye to our audience after that.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for this opportunity to talk to you today. I love Japan. Japan has been very good to me. I received a scholarship from the Japanese government. I studied very hard and had an interesting career. I've been an academic in Canberra, in Australia. I've had a corporate career in Japan. And for the last 10 years, I've been giving lectures and guiding tours. And I have Japan to thank for all of this. I've had a wonderful time. And so it's my way of thanking Japan to introduce to international potential visitors to Japan what Japan is all about. And I think the core thing that I love about Japan is its safety, its polite culture. People are always amazed at how the Japanese just are so willing to help you out. If you looking a little bit lost for a second, there'll be someone wanting to take you by the hand and ensure that you have a wonderful experience in Japan. And I think this is very rare. So it's just my little way of thanking Japan. Today's talk was my little way of thanking Mara. Mara, I think you've done an amazing job through COVID. I've listened to half of your virtual lectures. It kept me going. So thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to my talk today.
Oh, John, it was our pleasure. And we can tell that Japan's culture has rubbed off on you, and you come across as one of those kind people who also are very attentive. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and it was a pleasure to get to know what you know through the knowledge that you've shared in the last hour. For everybody else, we will see you next week here from Madrid. So hopefully we will see you back again. And again, We'll follow up with an email tomorrow if you have missed the information on how to tip the guide and where you can get a link to the handout as well as the recording. So have a good day, and we'll see everybody next week.